And starting off, may I call you Jenny?
Sure, absolutely.
So Jenny, starting off, I just want to mention that I'm really enjoying your book, Fixer Upper. I've been reading it and getting a lot out of it. So I'm thrilled that you've written this. And I'm really curious about the response you're getting. I'm sure that you're getting some pushback. You're getting some people who are, saying, yes, yeah, I agree with you. Overall, what kind of responses are you getting from the book and your ideas in the book?
It's really been fascinating to see how many people are getting interested in housing, including some of the people who haven't really been thinking about it before. So the main audience for the book was actually not people who are deeply in the housing world, because they already know a lot of this. So for people who work every day in the field, we know that we don't have enough homes. We know that there's not enough subsidy. We know that affordability has been a big issue for years and getting worse. But it's been really interesting talking to a number of local and state elected officials who focus mostly on other areas, but are starting to hear from their constituents that this is an area. I've heard from quite a few kind of economic development and workforce development people who are hearing more from their constituencies, from employers, that this is an increasing issue on their calendar. So it's actually been fantastic to talk to people kind of outside of the housing world and help them understand how housing connects to economic growth, to climate change, to overall stability and economic mobility.
I'm sure that you're hearing from some naysayers who are not really interested in development in multifamily housing and more development, those types of things. What are they saying to you?
So I've actually not heard that much from people who are supply skeptics. I don't know whether they haven't read the book or just aren't interested in having a conversation. But by and large, I have not had conversations where people said building more housing isn't part of the solution. And it was really important to me in writing the book to make clear that there are, we both need to build more housing, but also we need more subsidies for low-income households. One piece of that alone is not going to work on either side of that. So providing more, for instance, housing vouchers, if we don't have apartments to put people in, is not going to solve the problem. Building apartments but not providing subsidy means that low-income households can't afford it. So as far as I'm concerned, these are absolutely two sides of the same coin. And I have not heard anybody say, actually, both of those things are not important. I think that's a harder position to take if you present these as two sides of the same problem.
So I understand that you've been saying on a national level we don't have we don't have one housing problem. We have a multitude of housing problems. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So at the national level, the two problems are we haven't built enough homes to accommodate the growth caused by job growth and population growth. The estimates are something like 3.5 to 4 million homes short nationally. And we stopped building homes altogether during the Great Recession. It took us a decade to get back to pre-recession levels of production, and that just leaves us short a lot of units. The other problem is that everywhere in the country, the 20% of poorest households don't earn enough income to afford market rate housing without a subsidy. And that really is an income problem. We see that both in expensive markets like Greater Boston, but we also see that in smaller towns, rural areas, and in cities that have a lot of vacant housing, that have excess housing, but they also have a lot of poor people. And this really is a function of the government not providing enough subsidy, not making housing supports an entitlement. It's entirely a question of political will and budget. But this is also a longstanding problem, and we're going to need to drum up more political will to solve it.
I know here in the Boston area, there's been a lot of talk, and it's true that we have a serious housing shortage. But we also have a situation where housing costs more and more. I see building going on all the time in my area and throughout the Boston corridor, but it looks very upscale to me. It is very upscale. How do we square that? How do we deal with that and make more housing available for people who need affordable housing in the face of this?
So one fact that we just have to accept is that new construction is expensive. New construction has always been expensive. The land costs money, the labor and materials cost money, the production process costs money. And of course, at the moment with interest rates very high, it costs a lot to borrow money to do the construction and to finance the development. So we should understand that new construction will always be expensive. It has always been expensive. If we want new construction to be affordable to low-income households, you have to provide an upfront subsidy in some form, whether that's providing free land or subsidizing the development process. The thing it should make easier is when we build a lot of new construction, it takes off some of the pressure and competition for older existing homes. That's part of the problem we have now in regions like Boston. Even older homes that are not in great quality are really expensive because we haven't built enough of the new construction for high-income households. And so high and middle-income households are competing with lower-income households for these older units that otherwise should be more affordable. So we want to be clear about the new construction doesn't solve the problem for low income without a subsidy, but it's an essential part of the process of making more housing available. We also know that in markets where we're not building enough, particularly new high-end multifamily housing, that a lot of the older apartment buildings are getting bought and rehabbed and then become more expensive. So instead of filtering down and becoming cheaper, they're actually filtering up and becoming more expensive, right? And that's because investors see this as a good place to put their money, precisely because there isn't enough new construction going on.
And I know there are some locales looking at in Massachusetts the ADU rules and to allow for the what some call the granny flats and mother-in-law suites, things like that. Is that a way that could effectively put a dent in this housing crisis in Massachusetts, in your opinion?
So ADUs are a nice part of the overall housing ecosystem. They serve certain kinds of purposes. They're not going to fix the overall housing shortage by themselves, but there's no reason to prohibit ADUs. So the way to think about this is it opens up spaces for instance, low-income homeowners to create a rental unit that brings in extra income, or for older homeowners to create space for a caretaker or for younger family members to live with them. So this idea that particularly it's very supportive of intergenerational housing and allowing people to get into neighborhoods where there isn't purpose-built rental housing, ADUs can be great for that, right? And they're relatively low density. They fit into neighborhoods nicely. There's no reason to oppose them. On the other hand, we shouldn't expect that legalizing ADUs is going to solve the housing shortage. First of all, we know that most homeowners are not, in fact, going to add an ADU in the short term, right? This involves taking out a loan, doing some construction, and many homeowners don't need the space or the income and aren't motivated to do that. So we have relatively low take-up rates in most places where it's legal. Even when we add that, it's nowhere near the scale of the housing we need. And also, part of what we need is more homes close to job centers and close to transit. ADUs aren't necessarily the way to get a bunch of apartments on top of a commuter rail station. So legalizing ADUs is a great idea. We should do more of it, but that's only the start of the broader solution.
And if you can speak for a moment about the benefits of transit-oriented development, please.
Sure. The greater Boston region is one of the best examples. Boston actually has a fantastic transit system compared to most US metro areas. In addition to having the T and having high frequency buses in the urban core, it also has an extensive commuter rail station, which makes it possible to live, for instance, in Worcester and yet be in downtown Boston for a job relatively easily. The problem is many of the commuter rail stations are surrounded by commuter parking lots or by low density single family housing, which means that not that many people actually live within walking distance of a commuter rail station. That is entirely a fixable problem. Making it legal to build apartment buildings near transit does good things for ridership. It opens up those job centers for people who can't afford to live there. It creates space to have a walkable corridor with some neighborhood serving retail. So there are all sorts of advantages that we can find by making better use of this really valuable but underused land around commuter rail stations.
This sounds like a long-term project that's going to take a long time to happen.
Yes, all of the changes to zoning and land use are just laying the groundwork for changes that will roll out over many years. And we can think about sort of the second half of the 20th century, we had rules that prohibited mixed use development, so a mixture of residential and commercial. We had zoning rules that prohibited anything except single family detached houses on most land. So we have been building under this very restrictive regime for 70 years or more. We have built up land use patterns around that. We are just starting to make changes to the zoning and other kinds of rules that allow us to make changes to land use, but these will show up over time. So this is both good news for people who are worried about rapid change and also a caution for some of the advocates. We shouldn't expect to see drastic changes in our built environment within the next 3 to 5 years. Over the course of 10 years, we will start to see differences. We will see more infill development, but this is a project that's going to take a while.
So zoning changes does not mean construction, correct? I think some people are concerned about construction going on, revolutionary changes, but zoning means paving the way for future development, correct?
That's right. And zoning is really intended to stop unwanted development. It can't induce development that we want. So also think about, we could legalize high-rise apartment buildings in the middle of Kansas, and you wouldn't get any high-rise apartment buildings because the rents don't support it. So all zoning can do is prohibit development that the market wants to be doing. If we take away the zoning rules or loosen the zoning rules, we are enabling the market to respond when it makes sense to do that. But a blanket zoning change across the state is not going to produce the same kinds of outcomes everywhere. And so part of what we're still waiting to see is when you do something like the MBTA communities, not all places will have the same kind of market response. And we have to wait and see what that's going to look like.